Good afternoon and welcome everybody. In this cold weather, I think we have made a wise decision to be here and listen to this interesting discussion about a hot topic in international political agenda. For the last few months, Greece has been discussed worldwide, not only because of its long-standing economic situation, but also because of the changes in its domestic political scene. The early elections were organized on 25th of January, as we all know, and as it had been expected, the radical left coalition Syriza won the elections with a quite large margin, and even though it couldn't form a one-party government, Syriza is now in the cabinet as the larger partner. So what is going to happen next? This question has been asked by international observers constantly, and still there are a lot of uncertainties with regard to the future of the Greek politics, with regard to the future of the Greek economy, and also the relations with the European Union. And also we have to consider the possible consequences, possible repercussions of these developments within Europe, because such alternative movements that are offering alternative ways to cope with political economic problems have been rising in Europe. There is a large variety of movements from the far right to the far left, and for the first time, as Syriza claims, such an alternative current came to power, so they are promising change not only in their own country but also in Europe. What can Syriza achieve with its promises, or even whether Syriza can keep its promises as they are, is still being debated, and today is also an interesting day. We haven't planned it beforehand, but today there is an important meeting among the ministers of, the finance ministers of European Union countries, and they are going to discuss a possible new package or new solution to the demands or requests of Syriza government for a new measures to cope with this situation, economic situation in the country. So there are a lot of uncertainties, and in SETA we organized this discussion, and we have invited three very distinguished panelists, experts, who have researched and written extensively on relevant issues. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Ioannis Grigoriadis. He's a political scientist, and currently he's working at Bilkent University, Department of Political Science and Public Administration as assistant professor and Jean Monnet Chair. Among his recent publications is Instilling Religion in Greek and Turkish Nationalism, which was published in the year 2012, and which was also translated into Turkish. Dr. Grigoriadis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like first to thank SETA for giving me the opportunity to address you today on a topic that I find very interesting and very topical. Of course, being a Greek who has been living outside Greece and been watching what's happening in the country over the last years allows me to take some issues from a certain perspective, like I'm within and without outside the country at the same time. So we've agreed to split the workload between the two of us. I will be focusing more on the domestic issues, while Dr. Tsarokos will be talking about foreign policy relations with Turkey and Cyprus. I would like to highlight a few bullet points which can help us have a discussion later, because we'll have ample time for discussion, as we know. The first point I would like to highlight is that this electoral result wasn't unexpected at all. It is a long process that leads to this very spectacular success of Syriza. Syriza is a party that moved from almost 4% of the electorate to this 36% that it got in the recent elections. This is due to the very extraordinary conditions that the economic crisis and the implementation of the reform program brought about in the country. It's also a big failure of the coalition government that preceded Syriza in power. These consisted of the two parties that played a dominant role in the post-1974, post-Junta Greek politics. This is PASOK on the one hand and New Democracy on the other hand. Both parties used to alternate the power over the last years, but in many respects they appear to be responsible for the conditions that brought Greece to the economic crisis of 2009 onwards. And although they appear to be the parties, they claim to be the parties that they would bring about the desired change and reform, they appear to be rather unsuccessful in that. And that's a big discussion, I think to keep in mind since we talk about Greek politics and what Syriza is trying to bring. In many respects, Syriza is arguing that an end to the austerity policies needs to come through, and all the suggestions that come from the European Union need to be renegotiated or rediscussed. In many respects, I would argue that although they wouldn't say it in such explicit ways, the coalition government wouldn't be very much in favor of the structural reform measures that were necessary according to European authorities for Greek economy to recover. So the implementation of the memorandum measures that now is a discussion point, a negotiation point between the Greek government and the European Union wasn't really full or complete. So many of the structural reforms never happened or happened in a very sort of half-baked way. So that's something that I think that we need to keep in mind. If we look into the electoral campaign, we'll see that the parties that used to be in power tried to emphasize on the issue of fear about what the Syriza government might mean for Greece, whether Syriza might destabilize Greek economy completely and we end up in what has been coined as the exit of Grexit, like the exit of Greece from the Eurozone. Syriza's strategy was more positive, and I think that's one of the reasons that it was able to win more votes. It could, of course, capitalize on the anger of the Greek public against the austerity policies that didn't deliver much or didn't deliver what was expected. But Syriza was also able to highlight the question of hope. So hope was sort of transmitted to the Greek audience. Whether this is realistic hope or not is another discussion. Whether what Syriza promises can be done is another big issue, in my view. But people thought that things are so bad with this government, so we need to have a change in the government. So Syriza appeared to be the choice for this. However, I must highlight here, in the sense that although Syriza is a party that has been a party that came from the periphery of the Greek political spectrum, many of the ideas that Syriza sort of seems to espouse are not very peripheral. They have been rather mainstream over the last 30 years. And this is an issue that I think needs to be highlighted. So, for example, the populist take that Syriza took in many of the issues, like promising almost everything to all the people that suffered under the memorandum conditions, without considering the economic sort of consequences of addressing their grievances. Some of them might be legitimate, some of them might not, given the new circumstances that Greece needs to live through following the economic crisis. These are issues that, of course, in a sense coincide with the Greek political culture, the fact that populist parties tend to win votes, especially under sort of crisis circumstances. In many respects, we can argue that if we could think that PASOK used to be the party that was left-wing and populist and was able to win the hearts and minds of Greeks in the 80s and ever since, we can see that New Democracy in the later 90s and the early 2000s turned more populist itself in order to be successful. So in many respects, it imitated many of the sort of practices that PASOK was sort of specializing or excelling in the previous years for this to be successful. So in light of this, I also need to highlight that Syriza's growth has also been possible through the inclusion of party members, especially from PASOK, and people that were not sort of outsiders to the state structures over the last 15, 20 years. So I would argue that sort of it is a bit difficult to say that Syriza is a complete new actor in the field. So it's new, yes, but it also carries many of the old sort of connotations and the meanings that other political parties were communicating in Greek politics. Many argue that Syriza's success has been also very much facilitated by riding this sort of combination of what has been called in Greek political discussions as nationalist populism. So the sort of this tradition of left-wing nationalist populism that has been rather strong in Greece, also due to PASOK, was a medium, a vehicle that helps Syriza address its message to higher and sort of wider masses. And in many respects, this proved greatly facilitating electoral success, but may make things very difficult now that it's in power. Because now it's the time to make compromises. Now it's the time to address issues in negotiations with the European partners and with sort of the IMF and the European Central Bank, the Troika. And this is a difficult moment. Many would hope that Syriza would signal its willingness to strike a coalition, strike a sort of a compromise with the European authorities and the Troika by picking a center-left or sort of center party as a coalition partner. And this did not happen. The choice of forming a coalition government with a far right-wing party that was also very strongly anti-EU and anti-reform in its rhetoric gave a signal that Syriza might not be really interested in a compromise, but might be heading towards a sort of a clash with the Europeans. And I think this is the reason, if you look into how, interestingly, the Greek stock market performed, like shortly before the election day, when it was almost certain that Syriza would win, it went up, but it went sharply down when it turned out that Syriza would not be single-party government, and they chose their wrong sort of right-wing partner to form a coalition government. So this is something that is a big question mark in my view. If we look into domestic politics, we can argue that Syriza might be able to corner this party, because Syriza needs some support, and it might be in the medium term able to develop sort of alliances, have new elections maybe under new circumstances so it can become a single party government. But in the short term, it is an issue that needs to be addressed, I think. We can look into the other parties. I think the situation in the chief opposition party, New Democracy, is a very problematic one. Right now, the party appears to be not able to sort of perform the political role that one would have expected. Many would have thought that the former prime minister would leave the position. This has been a tradition in New Democracy over the last decades, that if someone who loses parliamentary elections is resigning immediately, so the party has a sort of new opportunity. But Samaras appears to be thinking, I think, that Syriza will fail very quickly and very badly, so there will be elections and the New Democracy will quickly come to power. I don't find this to be the most likely scenario, but in many respects this prevents the sort of a renewal within the party ranks that I think is essential for the party's sort of recovery into a dominant position in Greek politics. Third party is maybe the most alarming of all cases, is the Golden Dawn. The neo-Nazi party was able to consolidate its position in Greek politics. And there is a strong fear, which I think the Greek finance minister raised last week in Berlin and raised a lot of attention when he said that if Syriza fails, the Nazi party will become stronger. I think that's a reasonable scenario, unfortunately, that if many of the sort of voters that voted for Syriza out of anger, out of desperation maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to punish the Greek political system by voting for a party that appears to be even more sort of outsider or unconventional than this one. So it is a big point of concern. And it's important to highlight that this electoral success has happened despite the judicial investigations and the arrests of many of the party members. And despite the sort of extensive media reports about what the party is, what the party argues, and what the party has done. One could have argued before that it was sort of negligence or ignorance that allowed for the support for this party. This is, I would say, decreasingly the case now. If we look into other parties, the River Party is maybe an interesting case, a party that, a new party that tried to represent an alternative to the old coalition parties. It has tried to develop a pro-reform, pro-EU, and pro-memorandum position to the extent that the memorandum measures are necessary for the sort of recovery of the Greek economy. Its performance has not been particularly great, but it hasn't been, I mean, it was something in the middle. They could have done better, they could have done worse. But they have been, they become the fourth political actor in the country, but unfortunately I haven't seen them very active ever since the election date. So I would have expected them to take a more active position in what has been transpiring over the last week. I haven't seen that, maybe because it's a new party, so they have been able to get up to the position, but given the sort of extraordinary conditions that the country is going through, I would think that their contribution is definitely essential and necessary. PASOK is in another difficult position. PASOK has been suffering the most has been punished the most from the economic crisis that has hit Greece. And it will be going through a new leadership election, so there will be a new party leader in the following months. And last but not least, it will be the Independent Greeks, the party that I mentioned before already, the far-right-wing party that made this unexpected alliance with Syriza party. I would expect this party to try to substitute New Democracy. I would think that their objective would be if the government continues and if New Democracy appears to be at a loss, as it appears to be right now, they would try to carve an ever-increasing percentage of support from New Democracy. Only it remains to be seen how things unfold. It's very hard for us to make any prediction in these circumstances. But I would like to highlight 3 points that have, I think, are the most important. All the discussion that is going on at the European level and domestic level is about the Greek debt, whether the Greek debt is sustainable or not, whether the haircut is necessary or not. I think that's an important point, but there are 2 other points that are maybe more important. The first issue is the question of the deficit, which brings the Greek government in this very difficult position right now, because if there is no deal with the Europeans, there might be difficulties in meeting salary obligations or sort of keeping the banking system afloat. And the other question, which I think is even the most important, is the question of the Greek economic model. How can this economy be reformed so that it becomes competitive? Many of the issues that refer to competitiveness are linked to the reform measures, not all of them. It has been argued, for example, that the reform measure has been focusing too much on taxing and less on sort of structural reforms. But unfortunately, this discussion is not happening yet. And I'm afraid that if this discussion happens, many of the people that have supported Syriza for change won't be very supportive, because Syriza has been enjoying in recent years, I mean in the last 1 or 2 years, support from several clientelistic networks that have been pinpointed by the European Union as responsible for many of the shortcomings of Greek economy. So achieving success on this would be rather difficult. In a sense, success An agreement with Europeans might mean serious clashes within the party ranks, but without an agreement with the Europeans, a major social crisis may be imminent because of the economic emergency situation that may come any moment. These are my points for the beginning. Thanks for your attention.
And thank you for being so punctual. And this was a very useful summary for us to understand first the political climate that led the rise of Syriza and its coming to power. And also we have been informed with the speech about the current situation and prospects of the other parties. And I am now much more convinced that Syriza is on a very thin ice to satisfy the hopes, to fulfill the hopes of the public, and also to keep it as a political actor in Greek politics. So thank you very much. And our second speaker will be Dr. Dimitris Sarouhas, again from Bilkent University. He is currently the head of the department and Jean Monnet Chair in European Union politics in the Department of International Relations. And he is the author of Social Democracy in Sweden, The Threat from a Globalized World, which was published by Tauris in 2008. So Dimitris Sarouhas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me at SETA. I would like to start my remarks by informing the public that has kindly attended today that SETA was very kind to invite me about 4 years ago to discuss the Greek crisis. And we find ourselves in February 2015 discussing pretty much the same topic. So the conclusion I take from this is things haven't really moved much forward ever since. So we do seem to have a structural issue when it comes to the conditions that pertain to the Greek economic problem. My remarks will be focused today on a few things that will run through the line of domestic politics and international politics. So I'll say a few words about what Syriza is, because very often we talk about Syriza and we assume that here you have another party that has simply emerged over the last few years. I think it's good to know what the historical origins of the party are, and this will help us understand why it is likely to take the negotiation position it will take towards Europe. And then I'll say a few words about the political economy of Syriza and the political economy of Europe, because in the same panel that we sat here in the very hospitable premises of SETA in 2011, I had made the prediction, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one, that the politics of austerity as practiced in the European Union is going to fail. It's going to lead to massive social and political dislocation, and it is going to lead to the rise of new political actors that will have to provide an alternative political and economic agenda. And I think that the triumph of Syriza in the election, gaining 36% of the popular vote, is proof of that. And I'll try and link a little bit this notion of the politics of austerity with the debate between Berlin and Athens, European institutions, and the Greek government. And then I will say a few words about foreign policy, just to finish off with a particular focus on Greek-Turkish relations and what the Turkish audience is likely to expect from the new administration. Let me start a little bit with Syriza. Syriza is the so-called coalition of the radical left. It is important to keep in mind, however, that the historical nucleus of this party organization, what has today become a political party, lies in the Greek version of Eurocommunism. It lies in the so-called alternative left movement, which broke off from traditional left-wing communism by embracing Europeanism, taking its cues from the transformation of the Italian Communist Party already back in the 1970s. And it is important to know that this nucleus of the party, which was formed in the 1990s, has made sure that some of its key people are today represented in cabinet. One of the good examples of this is the Vice Prime Minister, an economist, Yanis Dragasakis, who is not as mediatic as the Finance Minister, Yanis Varoufakis, but who, however, is a very seasoned politician, very experienced, older than the Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, and potentially a very important player in the negotiations that are currently ongoing with Europe. So the nucleus of the party lies in those origins. Over time, that coalition of the left, what used to be called Synaspismos, became Syriza, the coalition of the radical left, not least because the party started, and this is very much linked with what is happening elsewhere in the European Union, to become increasingly disillusioned with the mainstream center-left political approach to political economy. In Europe today, often the talk is, certainly among progressive political circles, of the danger of social democratic parties suffering what is called PASOKification, which is to say to move from 45% of the vote to 5% and not really understand why. So Syriza became a larger coalition of radical social movements, of people that thought and acted alternatively from the mainstream, and it also embraced strongly the ecological movement, the nascent ecological movement in Greece. The environment minister today comes from the Green Party, and other ministers are also outsiders from Syriza. The Minister for Public Order, for instance, comes from the Democratic Left Party. I'm saying all this to highlight to you that Syriza is a heterogeneous coalition in which my understanding is, particularly with regard to the economic program that the party wants to formulate, there is an ongoing struggle between the more social, democratically minded members of the cabinet and members of the party who are not only willing but are very much pressing for the outcome of the negotiation with the European Union to be a compromise, and the more radical elements within the party who are asking from the Prime Minister to fulfill 100% the election promises that the party made prior to the election. Now, what is going to be the likely outcome of that? As Yanis mentioned, it is impossible for us to know. My own prediction, given what the finance minister has said, and also the flurry of meetings that our prime minister has had in Berlin, in Rome, in Paris, in Vienna, and elsewhere, is that there is going to be a compromise solution to the Greek demands, not least because the latest proposal that appears to be on the table, all of this is to be confirmed today and also in the next fortnight, but the latest proposal made by the Greek government is a very, very sensible proposal, in essence asking for a debt repayment process to become conditional on economic growth. I would think that this is the first and most important demand of the Greek government on the part of the European institutions. And the second one, of course, which is also very mainstream, it has nothing to do with any radical policy proposal, regards the primary budget surplus. Because in the current agreement, the Greek government is obliged to obtain primary budget surpluses around 4%, and with that money make sure that it repays the debt and fuels economic growth in the economy. This is impossible. It hasn't happened. It will not happen. And I think a compromise can be found there to make sure that Greece continues to abide by the rules of the Eurozone, reducing the primary budget surplus requirement to around 1 to 1.5%, and therefore be able to fund many of the social policies that the government has promised. So personally, I think this is going to be possibly a prolonged process, but I cannot really see the possibility of a break between the Greek government and the European institutions. And why is this the case? And why do I take a slightly more optimistic point of view than my counterpart? I do so because, as I said at the beginning, the politics of austerity has found its most extreme manifestation in Greece. It has led to an unemployment rate of 26%, and a youth unemployment rate of about 55%. It has reduced the purchasing power and living standards of the middle class massively, and it has led to social and economic dislocation. But Greece is not alone, and that is something very important which many on the part of the government rightly point out. Clearly, the consequences of the politics of austerity, which has been implemented almost uniformly in the European Union over the last 5 years, has led to the reduction of purchasing power and living standards across our European societies. And yes, it is the South that has suffered the consequences most blatantly, hence Syriza in Greece, hence Podemos in Spain, possibly a coalition partner in the forthcoming Spanish elections. But this is not to say that in the rest of the European Union we have not had massive unrest. That unrest has been manifested in different ways, for example through the extreme rise of the extreme right in countries such as France or the UK. It has been demonstrated through protests in cities such as Brussels, which had never seen something similar. In other words, something has been simmering for a very long time in Europe. And to my understanding, the election of Syriza is a wake-up call to the European elite, to the European institutions that have sought to follow an economic orthodoxy that doesn't pay out, that doesn't satisfy the European citizens, and at the end of the day sets in peril the great achievement of European integration that the European Union has been successful at building up. Often the debate seems to be focused these days, particularly if you follow the popular media, between Germany and Greece. And I think to a certain extent it is correct that the two countries represent the two poles of the debate. Germany, on the one hand, which has stuck to its guns of so-called fiscal consolidation. To you and me, that means austerity. A fiscal consolidation that has punished the German people as much as it has punished others, with the need for, to mention one example, the need for investment in public infrastructure in Germany having become as urgent as in any other European country, but not being addressed by the coalition government. And Syriza, on the other hand, of course, who represents the rejection of austerity. What is very important about the outcome of this battle of ideas at the heart of Europe will be the position of other countries. And here I would like to highlight the position of France. We all talk about Syriza today because Syriza is the victorious party in the election. In 2012, in Europe, we rightly talked about François Hollande and the election of the Socialist Party in France, who was elected on the promise of change. Change from the policies followed by Nicolas Sarkozy, the failed economic policies of the previous administration. Over the last 3 years, the record of the French government seems to be less than satisfactory, and it is governments such as the one by François Hollande in France or Matteo Renzi in Italy, indeed of the Austrian coalition government of the Social Democrats and the centre-right, who will have to, in a way, weigh into the debate. Greece will find itself in an almost impossible situation if it is to face alone the fiscal orthodoxy that the German finance ministry represents, but not necessarily Mrs. Merkel. I think Mrs. Merkel is a very pragmatic politician. She has dealt with problems as they have come each time that they have come, and I do not believe that Mrs. Merkel wants the dissolution of the Eurozone or the so-called Grexit, the Greek exit from the Eurozone. But it is the finance ministry who is highly trained in the politics and the economics of ordoliberalism, which poses the greatest challenge to the new Greek government and its potential allies. So I think the outcome is to be determined. It is obviously an open negotiation, but personally, I would tend to count myself among the more optimists in the sense that eventually, surely, the European Union's own interest and the interest of the European peoples throughout the European Union, not only in Greece, not only in the south, is predicated upon a new economic settlement that will, on the one hand, make sure that established rules will have to be respected, at least for the medium term, but at the same time, punitive austerity that pushes people to the margins of society and to the extremist wings of politics will have to be removed. And closing this circle of my intervention, I want to highlight a very positive contribution that the election of the Syriza government in Greece has made, irrespective of the outcome. The Syriza government, in coalition with a right-wing populist party, may prove to be a parenthesis, in fact, as former Prime Minister Samaras seems to be thinking, according to my colleague. But even if it proves to be a parenthesis, it has already made a massively important positive contribution to our debate about European politics and about the future of the European economy, because it has finally brought politics back into the picture. It has allowed for a debate that was simmering for years about what the future direction of Europe's economy is to finally emerge on the mainstream. And with a person like Mr. Tsipras as Prime Minister, and with a person as like Mr. Varoufakis as Finance Minister, this debate will most certainly become more political. And I think it is the absence of politics over the last few years that has led to the growing disgruntlement throughout Europe with our European project. So if only for that reason, if only because we can have again a battle of economic ideas in Europe, within the European family, Syriza has contributed very positively. And if I have a few more minutes, okay, so Greek-Turkish relations will take 1 minute. There is a certain, well, I think this is actually analogous to the importance that the Greek government attaches, not to Greek-Turkish relations and to the role of Turkey, but more generally to the classical foreign policy domain. My understanding is that the government is, perhaps rightly, preoccupied with the ongoing negotiations, trying to make sure that it will not break at least all of its pre-election pledges, and at the same time make sure that the country remains in the Eurozone. And foreign policy, or at least classical foreign policy of high diplomacy, has taken a back seat. My understanding is that the new Greek government, let me put it this way, a policy area where we are likely to see the least change in comparison to the previous mainstream parties' approach is going to be foreign policy. The pronouncements, the statements, the policy attitude displayed by the new government, also whilst in opposition, as the major opposition party since 2012, suggests that the Tsipras administration is very likely to continue on the path of the previous administration, wishing to cooperate effectively with the Turkish government, with Ankara on issues of mutual interest, not least when it comes to relations when it comes to trade, tourism, and other areas of low politics. But I don't really see any major fundamental shift with regard to the previous administration's understanding of the more contested issues that surround the political relations between the two states. So a large degree of continuity in foreign policy, including Greek-Turkish relations, but quite clearly a much more pronounced position when it comes to issues of economic policy and the partnership with the EU. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you, Dr. Saruhas, for this interesting discussion of the economic politics of the Syriza government and its relations with the European Union, and thank you for bringing the issue to international politics. Maybe we will hear more about this dimension from our third speaker, Professor Ali Resul Usul. He is currently the chair of the Center for Strategic Research, affiliated to the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has published extensively on Turkey-EU relations, the issues and problems of democratization, the politics in the MENA countries, Central Asian politics, and theoretical issues in the IR discipline. Among his publications is the book entitled Democracy in Turkey, the Impact of EU Political Conditionality, which was published in the year 2011. Professor Usul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the SETA organizing such a very important issue and timely issue. Let me first express my ideas about the Greek politics and its relation with the wider European politics, and then I'm going to, in a very brief sense, discuss the Turkey-Greece relation, particularly not the Turkey-Greece relation, but the Turkish-EU relations in the light of the recent development. And as discussed here, Greece basically is going through very difficult times and periods, and Tsipras and Syriza basically come to the power now and rejected the austerity program as discussed here. But when we look at the situation, the political nature of the Syriza, I see more complicated and complex structure basically, because Syriza, initially when we look at the Syriza, it's a leftist party, it's a socialist party. As the gentleman stated, is a continuation of the European communism, basically. That's true. But on the other hand, when we look at the other partner of the government, like independent, what's the correct name? I mean Panos Kamenos. So it's basically from a far from party. Therefore, when we look at this nature of the government is quite complicated structure, have a very complicated nature. And the gentleman here, professors, defined the current government as a populist nationalism, but I prefer maybe the term of the leftist nationalism could be better, because we have a similar situation in Turkey now. Leftist parties, leftist socialist ideas, socialism, plus a sort of nationalism, basically ultra-nationalism. So the combination of both leftism, how is it possible, I don't know, but when we look at the appearance, the situation here is that there seems a sort of the combination of the synthesis, a kind of nationalism, ultra-nationalism and socialism. maybe it's a call to the leftist nationalism is proper. And so my understanding of the Greek case is that I regard the Greek situation now as a continuation of the wider European politics and basically European financial, economic, even the political crisis in the whole Europe in the last decade. And I think from a financial economic perspective, the Greek cases here is a reflection, sorry, is a sort of reflection of the failure of the European, pan-European economy and the financial union of the European Union. On the other hand, however, if you look at the case from a political perspective, I regard the situation is that basically we don't know now the whole political choices of the Syriza because the new government, and we have to closely follow the political preference of choice of the government, and basically regarding the foreign policy. And because in particular regarding the Turkish-Greece relation in particular that the professor mentioned here, we received mixed signals basically. You know, the current situation of the Turkey-Greece relation is basically good, but we have a very, very important problem, which is the Greece problem. The Cyprus question. Cyprus question, somehow Greece is somehow a part of the Cyprus question. But regarding the Cyprus question, when we look at the new Greek reflection, understanding, we received mixed signals. On the other hand, for example, the Prime Minister, when visited the Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, you know, there were some meeting with even the Turkish Cypriot. That's very good. But on the other hand, the other partner of the government, Panis Kamenos, reflected more hardline attitude toward the Cyprus issue. So, if we regard the situation, the government as a union, as a unified object, and we regard as when we look at it from a Turkish perspective, we receive the mixed signals basically regarding to the Cyprus issue. And so how do we evaluate all these from a wider European perspective? I see now more diverse, more strained, and centrifugal tendencies in Europe. Syriza government might lead to more anti-orthodox, I call anti-orthodox or unconventional search in Europe. More anti-orthodox orientation in Europe would emerge. So the recent Greek government, from my perspective, reflects somewhat the pan-European search now, search for anti-orthodox, unconventional search for political problems, economic problems, basically. And so, for example, if you look at the other countries now, a good example could be Spain, because there's a recent coming election in Spain. Podemos is a good example, because Podemos, like Syriza, is a new party, quote-unquote, newly merged party, and he's emerged as a top contender in the Spanish politics with anti-austerity slogans. So we can't, I'm not sure whether the Syriza will change the European political dynamics, but it's clear that now Syriza has already been a source of inspiration for all European political parties. I mean, basically, not anti, but I mean, the leftist and the rightist political parties, and I call these tendencies as a centrifugal tendency in European politics. Secondly, I observe a very tense political atmosphere exists in Europe. and since the end of the Cold War, basically, now we have not only the Greek cases and the Greek crisis, but also Ukraine crisis from a political perspective, and the EU's relations, strained relations, tense relation with Russia, not only EU, but together with the United States. And the situation has continued to escalate. Escalation is continuing, but there exist different ideas about dealing with the Russian aggressive policies toward Ukraine and basic annexation of the Crimea. US, UK, and Baltic countries could prefer more active policies against Russia. On the other hand, Germany, for example, is different, surging for different policies comparing to the United States. Well, look at the Greece now, or the recent announcement of the Syriza government. According to some commentators, Syriza may forge closer relation with Russia. Although I mentioned there exist some different ideas in Europe about the dealing with the aggressive foreign policy, but now the EU is united about the sanction against Russia. But what about the Syriza? Well, some commentators believe that, some experts believe that Syriza could forge different policies regarding the sanction toward Russia. We are going to see basically all these details. But now forging a foreign policy, a common foreign policy in EU is much more difficult comparing to the a few months. So I mentioned the centrifugal tendencies in in whole Europe, and so Syriza basically could be given a good example. Anti-centrifugal tendencies, or a party surging for anti-orthodox policies in Europe from a left side, but we have other similar tendencies from the far right side. Or populist parties. Mr. Golden Dawn, the gentleman stated here in Greece, National Front in France, or UKIP in UK, or Dansk Folkeparti in Denmark. That could be given example to these centrifugal tendencies from the far right side, not only from a left side perspective. How will all these have an influence of European politics, European enlargement, European foreign policy, or Turkey relations? Of course, we need more comprehensive analysis. But we have no time, and I will confine myself to only the Turkey relations in the light of the recent political development in Europe. Regarding the Syriza, and I mentioned the mixed signals about Turkey. So more diverse, more centrifugal Europe, plus less enlargement-friendly environmental atmosphere in European Union, and more inward-looking Europe, plus more security concerns in Europe, basically military concerns against aggressive Russian foreign policy toward Ukraine, plus increasing extremism and polarization between the Muslim people in Europe and others, and the new situation in political crisis in Middle East. And so I believe we have deal with all these issues and its impact over Turkey relations. And but when you look at the basic structure of Turkey relations, Turkey relations is not at good moods basically since 2006, and since the partial suspension of the Turkish accession process because of the Cyprus question. Cyprus question, as you know, has hijacked the whole process, although legally Turkey is a negotiating candidate. Still, politically, the process is not going well. The other issue, from a Turkish perspective, EU-Turkey relations, the EU seems less charming for Turkish people and the Turkish government, which is very unfortunate case actually. And Turkish people basically now do not believe that Turkey would join the EU club in a foreseeable future. And from a Turkish perspective again, and policy makers, from a Turkish policy makers perspective, EU still is very important, and EU still performs as a real political economic anchor for Turkey. But on the other hand, Turkey is not desperate now for EU, and because there exists a serious problem in EU conditionality mechanism regarding the push-pull balance in the conditionality mechanism of the European Union. Furthermore, the Turkish policymakers believe that the world, which I believe we have to think together with the European politics, the world has been going through a very rapid change, and the other side of the world has started to emerge as a top contender in the world politics. And when we look at the speeches, when we look at the ideas of the policymakers, they regard Turkey, a country, as at the center of the Afro-Eurasia, strategically very important, and therefore Turkey should find a good balance between the north, south, east, west, and therefore European Union-Turkey relations is, from a Turkish perspective, Turkish policymakers' perspective, is now just one part of all this multi-dimensional part of the Turkish foreign policy. Okay, thank you very much, and maybe there might be some questions that we discuss.
Thank you very much, Professor Usul, for your presentation, and I think this gave us a wider picture about the possible consequences of the change in the political situation in Greece in a wider geography. So, anticipating that a large number of questions will come from the audience, we decided to keep the interventions as short as possible. Fortunately, we'll have a large time for questions and answers. But taking advantage of my position as the moderator, I would like to I would like to ask the first question, and my question will be to all the speakers. Whoever would like to answer can reply to my question. I also wrote elsewhere that Syriza is also a chance for the European Union, because it is not the most radical party that could have come to power in Greece, and negotiations with such a radical actor would have been more destructive, or dealing with such an actor would be more difficult for the European Union. And Syriza's leadership, at least for the last couple of years, have been underlining that they would want to negotiate, they would like to keep Greece in the European Union. Not only that, but also they were committed to help European Union reverse its process of implosion and disintegration. This is what they call it. So the question here is whether the core of the European Union has become ready to approach the financial economic crisis, which started in 2008, and all the social, economic, political outcomes of this crisis as a structural or even existential problem, and would they become willing to adopt more radical, more structural measures to tackle this problem? In other words, how do you think the European Union will respond to this wake-up call, as Dr. Saruh has called it? No, just we will ask one question and respond to it. I mean, if you would like to go, please.
If I'm allowed to go
Sure.
to first,
Sure.
I would answer your question that even if we assume that this wake-up call is a legitimate one, and that it's not the Greek side that's on the wrong side, but the European side that's on the wrong side, or the German side, if we take the sort of the hardcore German position on this, I think that Syriza would make a bad defense of the cause if it fails to deliver the long-needed structural reforms that Greek economy and the Greek state needs. So in order to claim for the sort of European solidarity and sort of the end of the austerity policy, it's important to look into how the Greek public has been misspending all the sort of resources that has been generously awarded by the European authorities over the last years. To give you like an example that I think it's important to keep in mind, that there's been a lot of discussion about how bloated and how inefficient the Greek public sector has been. So if Syriza doesn't signal that it acknowledges this question as a critical one and is willing to take steps to address this, or even worse, if Syriza gives the opposite signals that they're just willing to go ahead the way that things used to go on before the crisis broke out, then it would be a very difficult case to support, because it would just appear that the Greek political elites have not learned anything from what happened in the country over the last 5 years. If they can signal this to the European authorities, I can think they can have a much stronger case for a rethink of European policies, which may have been wrong to a considerable degree.
It's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, because fortunately we have had signs in Europe over the last couple of years that finally some of the key decision makers are getting the message. What is the message? The message is that you have to get away from austerity only and embrace a growth and employment strategy. Countries do not pay debts back unless their people work, unless their national income increases. That means unless output goes up, so that they can actually resolve the debt problems. It happened in the past with countries such as Austria, Germany, the whole world. It's going to happen with countries like Greece and Spain. What are the encouraging signs? Well, one example is the Juncker investment plan. The president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, the most experienced leader in the European Union Council, Prime Minister of Luxembourg since 1996, and recently in trouble because of some involvement of his country into financial dealings that were not always very transparent. When he became Commission President, he called his Commission the last chance for Europe. A Christian Democrat called the new Commission the last chance to save Europe. I think that says everything to you. The Juncker investment plan is a very ambitious plan. Maximally, it foresees spending around 320 billion euros on investment in Europe, but not the kind of investment that does not produce more added value. So he wants to invest in smart technologies and all the rest of it. Will it be materializing? Will governments commit the money? This is still a matter of negotiation, and there is a lot of intergovernmental bargaining. I think the plan is a bit too ambitious. Because it foresees, according to some estimates, that for every €1 of public money going into the pot called the investment plan, about 15 euros or so of private money will follow. I think it's very ambitious, and it's not going to be realistic to expect this amount of investment, but at least it shows that what I defined as the wake-up call has slowly been coming into place. Syriza's election is the most obvious manifestation of that. But the fact that the Juncker Commission is committed, or at least appears to be committed, towards a growth and employment agenda shows that at least some European players are ready to live up to the need to create conditions for the European economy to stand on its own feet again. And of course, let us not forget very briefly that this isn't simply a question about Europe. This is a question about the world economy. This is a question about the need to make sure that economic growth picks up in a way similar to how the United States is now leading the way. Let us not forget that Europe is the world's laggard. It is the part of the developed world which continues to shrink, whose output levels have not reached the levels of the origins of the financial crisis in 2008. And even in countries such as the UK, who are now being portrayed as a successful example of economic recovery, GDP per capita in the UK remains today, following successive quarters of economic growth, lower than in 2008. So we have a structural problem, and one can only hope that European leaders will heed the call.
Okay, well, when the crisis, the financial crisis emerged in 2006 or 2007, we started to discuss whether the crisis now is structural or not. I mean, now, I'm not sure actually, but it seems that the crisis now is beyond economy and finance. So, if you look at when we look at the European politics now, we have started to see some anomalies regarding from a political perspective, in addition to the economic perspective. I mean, for example, now democracies, well, European democracies are the first-class democracies in the world, but when we look at now the recent economist analysis of the European democracies, the economists argued that now the democracies, the European democracies, are under great stress, coming from the populism plus some governmental issues, and so now it seems that the European politics are under a great tension. But this tension seems not only the economic and financial, but also political. Even the, related some issues related to the identity, European identity, because as discussed here, there are some problems regarding to the European solidarity understanding regarding the Greek issues. And so maybe the political or all these crises could challenge the paradigm, whole paradigm. I mean, we have to see and observe all these developments in the near future.
Please. Could you also identify yourselves when asking your question and keep it brief, please?
Hello, Piotr Krawczyk, Deputy Head of Mission Polish Embassy. First of all, thank you very much, SETA, for organizing this very timely event. We are always very interested in all events organized by the foundation. And second, let me also thank to the speakers for a very comprehensive speeches that brought us closer to the subject. And my question goes to the foreign policy. All of you underline in this or the other way the quest for alternative in the foreign policy of both Greece and Turkey. In terms of Greece, it's quite obvious that it's an alternative with the European Union. And what Ali just mentioned is rather a question of realizing of multidimensional aspects of the Turkish foreign policy. And the part of this quest is, not surprisingly, Russia, which is becoming more and more active with both Greece and Turkey. And my question would be how the Russian factor would influence the dynamics of the Turkish-Greece relationship, including Cyprus, because now we have to look at this triangle of, Turkey, Cyprus, and Greek. So how it will influence those relationships, both in, energy, political, and maybe security issue, and of course the solution process of Cyprus. Thank you very much.
So did you ask this to a specific? Okay, who would like to answer can go.
It is so difficult.
No, I can. Yes. Well, Russia has been always a favorite alternative of the most anti-European or Eurosceptic segments of Greek society. The idea would be that if the Europeans, and this has actually quite deep roots in Greek sort of intellectual and political history, like even in the sort of 18th century or 19th century, like they were the pro-Western sort of Enlightenment driven intellectuals or politicians that looked towards Western Europe as a sort of source of inspiration, and they would be the most sort of romantic religious nationalists that would look towards Russia. Historically, Greek political history and Greek political successes have been linked with the West. I mean, that's a fact. And I think that that's something that needs to inform or should inform the current Greek political debates about how Greece can get out of the current crisis. You mentioned how, for example, some extremist political parties in Greece have been arguing that Russia can provide solutions and Russia can get more involved in questions of foreign policy or even in questions regarding economic crisis. And the junior partner in the coalition government has been such an actor, so they have been voicing this issue. But honestly speaking, I don't see much potential into this. And I could make the case that even if Russia claims to have a special interest in Cyprus, when the Cyprus crisis came, you may remember the visit of the Cypriot minister to Moscow at the time that the negotiation was going on. And then the Russians appeared to be willing not to give anything, and this was a much smaller sum than the sum that the Greek government would need. And it turned out that Cyprus had to agree on a much worse deal than the one initially offered by the European authorities. So in light of this, I don't see any sincere or sort of comprehensive commitment of Russia in the resolution of Greek-Turkish relations or Cyprus. And I do see how falling energy prices might provide an additional obstacle to this, both because this affects Russian economy overall, but also because many of the energy projects in the region would sort of take as a basis energy prices that are no more around. So I would be a bit skeptical regarding such a strong role.
Thank you very much. If you would like to add something?
Very briefly, I don't have much to add to my colleagues' comments because I share most of those views. The only thing I will add is the new Greek government has been portrayed and potentially may wish to try and play a role with regards to countries such as Russia, which is characterized by a more, if I may use the term, multi-dimensional foreign policy. The new foreign minister is on record stating 3 days ago that we are committed Europeanists, but we see no reason whatsoever that our country should not engage with other partners around the world, and countries such as Russia and even China have been mentioned by him. What I find interesting in the statement is that it has a certain degree of parallels with how Turkish foreign policy has been redesigned, if you like, in recent years. But in essence, I would submit that the difference between Greece and Turkey being the fact that Greece is an EU member, I don't see any prospect of this changing anytime soon. And therefore, I share the view that the ability of Russia to influence basic parameters of Greek foreign policy, one of which would be, of course, the Cyprus problem, but also bilateral relations with Turkey, would be quite limited.
Okay, well, Turkey-Russia relations is a very interesting case, and because, you know, Turkey didn't recognize the Russian aggression policy or Russian annexation of Crimea. But on the other hand, Turkey is not now at the league of countries, European countries, sanctioned against Russia. So Turkey trying to find a balance regarding the European Western issues, Western countries, Western states, European Union and the United States and Russia. And when we now look at the current government, the Greek current government, Syriza, the initial reaction of Syriza regarding to this Russia is it seems dissimilar to the other European policies regarding toward Russia. And the other issue here is that, we are discussing now the Turkish Stream issue. And when the Putin came to Turkey in December, and he stated that the Southern Corridor cancelled, and now we could discuss the Turkish Stream. And there are two very important countries regarding the quote-unquote Turkish Stream. In addition to Russia, one is Turkey and the other Greece. So maybe I could speculate that maybe if the Turkish stream could be if the Turkish stream could be successful, then further rapprochement could be realized between the Turkey and Greece, and which could also include the Cyprus issue. And I agree with my colleagues. Cyprus is less related to the Russian issues now, Turkish-Russian relation or the Greek-Russian relation, but that could be changed. That could be changed. So, I mean, these are just optimistic ideas, optimistic speculation regarding the Turkey relation, regarding the Cyprus, because Cyprus now, unfortunately, is where the most obstacle between the for Turkey relations, and somehow have to be eliminated. And therefore, maybe the Turkish stream could be a good opportunity, although could open create a window of opportunity between Turkey and Greece regarding to the Cyprus issue.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes. Let me just remind, to keep pace, it would be better if you could direct your question to a specific speaker. Please go ahead. Microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Leonidas Karakatsanis, Research Fellow at the British Institute at Ankara and a Greek. Thank you for organizing this, specifically because after the third or fourth panel organized in Istanbul, some Greek colleagues were teasing us that nothing is taking place in Ankara. Well, it does. Okay, a question stimulated mainly by the first and the third presentation. How far right is the independent Greeks, ANEL, and how much can actually their nationalist tendencies affect Syriza's government? Let me make a small comment in order for the presenters to reply. Well, I think ANEL is as far right as the previous government was, in the sense that if you think about it, ANEL is a splinter of New Democracy, the central right-wing party of Greece, and the New Democracy had in its cadres much more radical, not far right, but we can say people that were closely more related to the neo-Nazi group of Golden Dawn members. So things are a bit more fluid, I would say, in what we can call the far right in Greece. It has been a significant part of what has been considered the mainstream right. How much can it affect Syriza's government? Well, I think I totally agree with Dr. Tsarouchas' presentation that there is a conflict within the government and a class of hegemony who will be able to take hands over specific issues. One is economy, the other is foreign policy. The only thing we can say that we already have some signs of this. The new government managed, in the declarations during the last 2 days, already announced that Greek citizenship will be given to migrants of the second generation immigrants in Greece, which, until now, it was the big, huge problem of the far-right nationalist right in Greece, which kind of proves that things are going to a way of compromising, and a hegemony of, the internationalist left core of Syriza will be the strong and hegemonic part in this coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe it would be better if you collect some questions and then give the word to the speakers. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Sarp Dachnar from Bilkent University. I'm asking this question to the fellow man, if you like, Mr. Tsarouchas. And my question is related to his statement that he said that he's quite optimistic about the future, and I personally share the view about the result of the election and the prominence of Syriza in Greece. My question is in two parts. My first question is, he said it's a structural problem that the world economy is suffering from, and in particular the EU is also suffering from the structural problems of the contemporary political economy. So if it's a structural problem, how is it possible really for Syriza to cut a favorable deal from the EU? This is my first question. The second one is, even though they can cut a very favorable deal, since the magnitude of the task is quite massive, the change is going to be more incremental. And if the change is going to be more incremental, then how it's going to recover the damaged, if you like, the disposition of the idea of EU? Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, if not, we can just go for this round.
So let me ask the question by Mr. Karakatsanis, whether there is a difference in how we define far right. Unfortunately, we have many representatives of the far right political scene popping up in Greece in recent years, so we can have sort of talk about diversity. What happened, though, if you ask my opinion, is that the crisis, and in particular the way that New Democracy handled it in the first years with the outright opposition to the reform policy of George Papandreou by Samaras, ended up radicalizing a segment of the Greek society, and that used to be sort of within the borders of New Democracy, but was somewhat under the control of the more center-right, more moderate part of the party. So we can argue that far-right, it's not that there were no far-right-wing voters in Greece in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, and they just appeared now, but they were somewhat encircled and controlled within New Democracy. But it's the sort of very populist policy of Samaras that changed completely when he came to power, that allowed for the splinter parties like Golden Dawn or Independent Greeks to show up. Having said that, I would think that New Democracy, even under Samaras, was a party that combined the elements you mentioned, yes, but also had some liberal, sort of center-right political figures that in the end gave a political message that was more moderate than what the Independent Greeks give. And I think there's a discussion that's going on whether we should call the Independent Greeks sort of far right wing or right wing, or whether they're different from the Laos party of Karatzaferis that used to be a coalition partner in the Papadimos government. But I think if we look into statements on issues like immigrants, issues like anti-Semitism, that there are some key issues that far right-wing parties take on throughout Europe, I would tend to agree that it is a far right-wing party. So that's an issue to consider. How will it affect the government? Well, it's very difficult to tell, because we can assume several scenarios going on. The scenario that Syriza just wants to consolidate its position and then they would get rid of them, or they may be able to get some MPs from them so they can strike their own one-party government. But I think all this is very much dependent on how the economic negotiations will go on. All this discussion assume that the success takes place and then politics can continue as usual. If there is no success, I'm afraid that politics won't continue as usual, and we may see very sort of unexpected or surprising developments. But let me point at something that you mentioned, this citizenship issue. I think Syriza has been trying to make a case that we will, in order to show that, don't worry, that we will still be a leftist government despite ANEL, that we will put forward the agenda, and the sort of citizenship bill is one of the most important issues. I think we'll have to wait to see how the vote will take place, if it ever takes place, to be sure that this can go ahead. We may see surprises, for example. Maybe the River MPs or the PASOK MPs may give a vote, and then the bill may go through. But then this could raise a lot of concerns about the stability of the government. Or can a government be sort of continue like this with partial support from the opposition parties or not? But let me remind you of something, and because we talked about the issue of populism. When the bill about the citizenship came for the first time in Greek parliament, it was by the Papandreou government. It was Yannis Ragoussis, the minister, who introduced a bill which was later overturned by the Greek Supreme Administrative Court. That took a very nationalist position, and then Samaras took the opportunity to revoke the law. If I'm not wrong, Syriza did not vote positively for that law. In that particular moment, in a sense, populism, or sort of siding with the more nationalist sort of sentiments of the Greek public opinion, appear to be more important for the party. So I would sort of hope that your view that Syriza would support this, like truly progressive policy, will come true. But it's all contingent upon how economics will unfold.
Yes. Before addressing Sarp's two questions, if I'm allowed a very small comment on this discussion of the independent Greeks, I think the position of this party, its programmatic statements, the way it addresses questions, including Europe, in my mind, very clearly categorize it in what political science, when it comes to political parties, calls right-wing populism. From migration to any other issue, this is not a far-right party. This is what the Golden Dawn is. The independent Greeks are a right-wing populist party, which, when it comes to the question of Europe, has repeatedly told the Greek people, we are not anti-Europeanists. We can discuss whether they mean it or not. We believe in the Europe of sovereign nation states. We dream of the Europe, of the Gaullist Europe of sovereign nation states working together, but not moving on to a federal level. So my understanding, if it's of any interest to anyone, is that the independent Greeks are a right-wing populist party par excellence. Sarp's questions. Thank you for those. Very difficult and almost impossible to answer, not least because they are futuristic. And as both of my colleagues have said, we don't have the crystal ball. It's very hard to know whether the government will enjoy the luxury of time of trying to affect the structural conditions around which the European project is created. Your first question was, how can Syriza address a structural problem? Well, the answer is it cannot. And no one really does expect, or should expect, I think, from one government of one member state of the European Union, of the weight that Greece carries in relative to other member states, to actually take upon its shoulder the almost messianic task of reviving the global economy. What it can do, and that's what I was trying to suggest in my intervention, is to bring again to the very heart of our economic policy debate this quest for growth and employment vis-à-vis fiscal consolidation. The need to make sure that structural reforms actually mean something more than the decline of living standards of people. And as I said in my original intervention, I think already when it comes to that issue, Syriza has made a very positive contribution to the repoliticization of our debate about where Europe is going. I also added, and I think this is a very crucial element in the currently ongoing negotiations, to what extent Prime Minister Tsipras will find allies in the Council. That is to say, to what extent will parties that are left of centre and who are as populous as parties right of centre in the Council be ready to agree with some of the structural propositions with which the Greek government will go to those meetings. Inclined to do so, first of all, they will meet the wrath of their own electorate, but more importantly for European integration purposes, they will allow this vicious circle to continue. Your second question was on how Syriza will recover the damage done to the EU. And again, I think the answer clearly has to be one that relates more multilaterally to the entirety of institutions. Syriza is a party that used to be minuscule and ended up being very powerful right now. Parties come and go. The important thing, I think, is the extent to which the European Union institutional architecture reorientates itself towards a pro-growth strategy. Because the centrifugal forces that you mentioned before, I think is a very suitable expression. We do see the cracking of the European establishment taking place. And we have now both the data, we have the objective data, and the statements by a whole series of different politicians of different political colors that admit that the current trajectory of the European Union is simply unsustainable. If we want the European Union to remain a zone of prosperity and welfare for its own people, and some form of inspiration for countries in its periphery and beyond, surely we'll have to recover a global role. And you cannot recover a global role unless your own people are convinced that the current political and economic trajectory is sustainable in the future.
Would you like to add anything to this? Okay. So since one of our panelists have to leave, we have to close the panel now. Yes, it's 5 o'clock, so we are out of time. Thank you for coming and listening to this very illuminating and thought-provoking presentation. I would like to thank to all participants on behalf of SETA for participating to our panel. And I hope to meet you again in another event of SETA. Thank you very much.